I need to make the 5-hour trip to go pick up a couple large bales of hay for the livestock. Unfortunately, I have a transmission fluid leak, and 2 years ago I replaced the seal for my transmission pan, and the Ford seal says, hey, you can reuse this seal, so I did. And unfortunately it doesn't look like it's holding. So it's 20 degrees outside right now, and I have to go replace that gasket. And I noticed that there was a couple points on my trailer that really need reinforced, so unexpectedly I'm going to replace that gasket and do some welding on my trailer today, so that soon I can go get that hay that I need for the animals. Goofball, you trying to eat my arm? I often tell people one of the most important steps to anything is to get started. Probably the most difficult part for most people is to transition from city life to rural life. It can be scary. How are you going to have work? Can you work for yourself? Can you create income? How much money are you going to need? What can you expect? And a lot of these questions really can't be answered until you really just do it. Everyone's situation is unique, and mine certainly was. I was laid off in 2020, and I had $6,000 and moved off grid, and I made it work. And I'm sure there's others that could. You know, if the more you can have saved and set aside, the better. If you could have at least 10 grand, that'd make a big difference. You know, if you could set aside 20 grand, that'd probably be pretty ideal. You certainly don't need $250,000 to just, you know, like going and buying a house. You might need $250,000, you know. I paid about 2 grand for my land, and I built my shop for about 4 grand. Now I'm building a cabin. It's a lot less than spending $250,000. I think it's kind of difficult to quantify for somebody how much they need to start, because, you know, I started with 6 grand, but I went without everything. And I think someone could easily start with 30 grand and blow through it quicker than I did the 6 grand. There were several months that I was able to get by on around $500 a month, but living extremely minimally. Because this lifestyle is so unique, I think just about everybody I know that went off grid had several people tell them how they were nuts. And it's just, the lifestyle is not what 90% of people plus are used to. If you can get a decent savings set aside, if you can set up and secure yourself a source of income before you ever move off grid, that would create a lot of security for you. The brutal reality of off-grid living, I've broken down many times. It's a 2-hour drive round trip to the nearest town. You have to be prepared to take care of that somehow. If you were going to pay a mechanic to take care of it, you might be in trouble. One time I broke down not even far outside of town, and I think it was $200 or $300 to get towed, you know. I'm grateful I was able to. I had to at that point. It wasn't something, you know, most of the lugs sheared off. I couldn't do anything about it where I was. That's pretty brutal, you know. You have to have a nest egg. You got to have an emergency fund for stuff. You have to have a plan. You got to have somebody you can call if something goes real wrong. You got to be able to pull yourself out, you know. I've been stuck. You're in the middle of nowhere, you know. So if you're not prepared, you could be in trouble. And I've gotten stuck and thankfully have the tools and know how to pull myself out. But that could be brutally real, you know. 20 degrees outside, stuck in the middle of nowhere. Maybe no one comes by for several days. You know, you got to be prepared for stuff. If you think about food, water, and shelter, and you keep those in mind, how are you going to produce each one of those? That will also create a lot of security for you. I've had to learn to slow down a little bit. I've broken a few bones since I've been out here. I really hurt my back one time and I was out for the count and I'm out here alone. I had to push myself to get up and still feed the animals every day. Those chores that you have to do every single day suddenly seem like a mountain if you can't move around. That's pretty brutal. A lot of people ask about the permitting process and legalities of off-grid living, and I think the easiest way to find all that out is to just call your county. There are several different departments: mapping, engineering, building, health, so on and so forth. You can call every one of those different departments and ask them specific questions about what you want to do. So finding out exactly what is and isn't allowed isn't impossible. Interestingly, it does seem like counties don't necessarily volunteer all information, though. I assume they just, they're trying to prevent people from moving out and just starting kind of a slum homestead, And I think that's the reason behind them maybe not always offering the easiest direct path for somebody to go out and start a homestead or build a home on their land. But I think you can kind of figure it out as you go. That's how I did it. And I just sat and took my time and figured out what I could and couldn't do, and then I spent a lot of time I spent a lot of time researching how I could go about permitting my home and my septic or alternative septic and what were the options. If you're going to raise your own meat, processing the animals really isn't easy. It's not something that I like to do. In fact, I would say I always put it off. I'm supposed to be throwing about 4 pigs in the freezer any day, and well, I'm going to replace a gasket today instead. I'll get around to it though. The learning curve of off-grid systems and skills can be pretty large. You might hear right now the tick, tick, tick of my diesel air heater. And even that was a learning curve for me. And I was familiar with them before I moved off-grid. I was a truck driver for several years. And I used the Webasto style heaters like that. But now they have these aftermarket versions that are cheaper. They're like $120 a pop. They're wonderful heat. It's nice dry heat. It's not wet like the propane. I learned that, propane, for every molecule burned, it creates 4 molecules of water. And that will add a ton of water to the inside of your structure, like this camper van that I'm in. And so the diesel air heat is way better. The propane is a nice little backup system. But anyway, those are things that you learn, the learning curve along the way. If you have skills that you can bring into homesteading right off the bat, any carpentry skills, gardening skills, food processing skills, welding, those are pretty useful things to be knowledgeable about. But I think that someone could start not knowing any of that and teach all those skills to themselves as well. In fact, like I say, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. You could be 3 miles outside of the nearest town, just happen to have a piece of property that landed off grid, and maybe you have a great source of income. You could even be living in a wheelchair or be elderly or whatever it is, and you could outsource all of these things. You could pay somebody to build your chicken coop for you. So there's other ways to do everything. But there are a lot of skills to learn. How to set up a solar system. And even once you master how to set up a solar system, there's new things coming out all the time. There's new things to learn, new technology, new circumstances. If you're going to raise livestock, taking care of livestock is a big learning curve. Getting comfortable hopping in and pinning down a pig to trim its hooves, trimming your horse hooves, training them to put their hoof up on your knee, working with the chickens, gardening. I didn't know how to garden. I didn't know how to weld really when I came out here. These are things that I had to learn, and there's a learning curve involved. You're not going to be an expert right off the bat. If you're really rural like I am, you're in the wilderness. You might lose pets to coyotes or other predators. You might lose livestock after birth. Animals are going to get injured. You got to be able to take care of them. You're definitely going to injure yourself. You should have good first aid. You know, if you absolutely loathe camping, then maybe the lifestyle is not for you. And there's a lot of people that this is not the lifestyle for you. You're not cut out for it. And that's okay. There's different types of people, you know. But you can make it lighter on yourself, harder on yourself. The lifestyle is definitely not for everybody. If you want to learn more about how I power my homestead, check out the link below. You can subscribe to learn more about the homestead in general, and I'll catch you guys on my next video.